Uh-oh.
Legal myths that will land you in prison. Good luck.
So you decided to do some crimes. Who hasn't? Well, thanks to those legal myths that TV shows and fake lawyers on Reddit continue to spread, you're probably in for the biggest surprise of your life. So the cops just burst through your door without a warrant, they didn't read you your Miranda rights, and you're probably going to be found guilty on nothing but circumstantial evidence, and you're defending yourself in the courtroom when it happens. Because even if you can't afford it, you are not entitled to an attorney. Because myth—
We're going to watch the full video with that guy in Tim Pool. I don't think I like either of those people very much, so probably not.
Number one, if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Yes, that's right, you are not entitled to an attorney. Well, to be more accurate, it very much depends. The founders were really serious about giving people individual rights against police and prosecutors, and that's why the Sixth Amendment says, quote, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. And the Supreme Court recognizes why this is a foundational right. Quote, of all the rights that an accused person has, the right to be represented by counsel is by far the most pervasive, for it affects his ability to assert any other rights he may have. But the baseline right to an appointed attorney comes from the Supreme Court's 1963 decision in Gideon versus Wainwright, and in that case, a Florida man named Clarence Earl Gideon was charged with a felony and couldn't afford a lawyer. He asked the court to appoint one, but they said no because Florida only provided lawyers in capital cases.
Damn.
Capital cases are where the defendant, if convicted, could face death.
Oh, that kind of makes sense. If you're accused of like, well, capital seems rough. Is that Florida right now, or has that changed? I can understand not providing ones for like misdemeanor crimes, maybe. But I feel like for all felonies, they should know. But
defended himself, lost, and went to prison. He appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, which unanimously ruled that the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to counsel in all criminal cases, even for those who can't afford to pay. But something got lost in translation because most people think this means you have a right to a free lawyer. Well,
any thoughts from your C-SPAN show? Not really. It was kind of boring. I got triggered that they got mad that I made fun of that crazy vet guy, but fuck it.
Well, sort of. Gideon established a requirement that states must provide attorneys to indigent defendants in felony cases. In a later case, the court clarified that the right to counsel applies to misdemeanor and petty offenses as well, as long as the defendant faces the possibility of incarceration. Now, the Supreme Court probably should have—
I was going to say that too. I was going to say, I feel like even if there's any chance of you going to jail, you should have an attorney provided to you, which is included in a lot of misdemeanors as jail time potentially. But
stopped it right there. Unfortunately, it wasn't done tinkering with the right to counsel. Instead of adopting a simple standard like you get a lawyer if the offense could lead to jail time, the Supreme Court pulled an Avril Lavigne and couldn't help but go and make things complicated. In Scott versus Illinois, the court held that the state does not have to provide a lawyer for a misdemeanor unless imprisonment is actually imposed by the judge.
That would still be insane. Misdemeanors can be life-destroying for any normal person. No, I think most people should be able to do a year in jail and not have that be too big of a deal. You can always do like drop shipping or whatever on like a phone that you take in, and I think you'll probably be okay. Most people probably.
Oh, SCOTUS, why do you have to go and make things so complicated? I see the way you're ruling like some other country gets me frustrated. Now, in our video about America's most unhinged judges, I talked about how a Texas judge abused this very principle by coercing defendants into marriage in cases where jail was a possibility but not a certainty. Now, none of the people the judge pressured into marriage were represented by counsel, even though their charged offenses could have led to jail time. And that was a legal catch-22. You only get a lawyer if you're going to jail, but by the time you know that, you've already gone through your hearing without one. And as usual with constitutional rights, terms and conditions apply.
I feel like the comments about the dude in the Trump crowd have ramped back up lately. Any speculation-wise, background strategy, or coincidence? I think I'm okay. I feel better navigating those conversations now. Every time it comes up, I'll just use it to force the conversation on the lack of decorum on the conservative side. We're finishing Factorio today or tomorrow, okay? And I need to sharpen and hone these arguments. And if I just have them more, I'll get used to it more. But I think it's good to force the conversation. I'd much rather do that than... Even if it ends up not working, I'd rather do that than take the cuckney of like being apologetic for everything when conservatives are just unhinged. People need to realize how unhinged conservatives are.
And Prince says that even when you do qualify for a court-appointed lawyer, the process isn't automatic. You have to apply for it, disclose your financials, and wait for the court to assign someone. And about those financials, while the lawyer truly is free for those who qualify, not many people qualify. Who qualifies as too poor to afford an attorney varies from state to state and sometimes from county to county. Many states use a multiple of the federal poverty guidelines to determine indigency, and so in 2025, the federal poverty guideline for a single person was $15,650. And many states set their number at 125% of that guideline, which means the person would have to earn less than $18,825 to get a free lawyer in those states. So yes, you have a right to counsel, but it's not a universal safety net. It's more like a conditional offer. If you're facing jail, if you're poor enough, and if the court says so, congrats, you get a lawyer. Else you better hope that the cops forget to read you your Miranda rights, because then you walk free. No arrest, no charges, just a smug smile as you strut out of the interrogation room, right? Myth number 2, police failed to read me.
Genuine question, doesn't it sound like you're deflecting when you're bringing to a point about decorum? No, because I have to find a way to, if I'm not rhetorically hitting it, then I'll figure out it eventually. But there has to be a way to hit against this this brain-dead whataboutism take or this brain-dead deflection take. It's not deflecting, and it's not a whataboutism when you are pointing out that you aren't playing by the same rules. Deflecting or whataboutism accusations are a whataboutism or are a deflection. For instance, if we were playing chess and then you move your pawn like a queen and you capture like a rook, and then I go, hold on, well, that's not fair. And like, okay. I'm like, okay, fine. And then I move my pawn like a queen and you're like, oh, you're cheating. Wow, really? You're going to do that? It's like, well, what the fuck? You literally just did that. Oh, whataboutism and deflection. So what if I did it all the time? You're going to do it now too? Well, yeah, that's the rule. Oh, so you think it's wrong, just to be clear, Destiny, you think it's wrong for me to move my pawn as a queen, right? Well, yeah, I think so. Oh, so now you're gonna do it. So 2 wrongs make a right? This is brain dead. It is the most retarded, base level, knuckle dragging engagement you could ever possibly have with any sort of system where everybody's expected to play by the same set of rules. And I will continue to hone that argument out, and I will continue to have that until people can understand that. I will never give that up because of the brain dead assertion of whataboutism when one side is literally pissing and shitting and raping you, and you're supposed to like sit there and clean up after them and nod happily the whole time and whatever. That's retarded.
My rights, case dismissed. Nope, that is wrong. But that hasn't stopped pop culture from spreading this myth. It's going to come as a shock, but real life is not a Medea movie.
You forgot to Mirandize her?
That old woman got the strength of any man.
I've got to let you go.
Now, the Miranda warning, which starts with you have the right to remain silent, comes from the 1966 Supreme Court case of Miranda versus Arizona. Before the police can interrogate someone who is in custody, they must inform them of their 5th and 6th Amendment rights, the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. If they don't, any statements made during the interrogation can be thrown out under the exclusionary rule, which is the legal doctrine that bars illegally obtained evidence from trial. But Miranda only protects your words, not your actions. So if the cops find a kilo of meth in your trunk, no amount of unread rights is going to make that disappear. On top of that, according to the Supreme Court, Miranda only kicks in when there is a custodial interrogation. If a suspect voluntarily comes to the police station and talks, that doesn't mean he or she is in custody. The takeaway, Miranda applies when a reasonable person would feel they are not free to leave. If the police arrest you for that kilo of meth in your trunk, but don't ask any questions, no warning needed. If they ask you questions before you're arrested and you answer voluntarily, still no Miranda required. That's why failure to read Miranda rights isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. So the next time a TV lawyer says they didn't read you your rights, so the case gets thrown in the bin, know this. The only thing that's going in the bin is that script's grade for legal accuracy. Now, if your plan to avoid all this legal trouble is to just lay low at home where police can't get to you without a warrant, well, I've got some more bad news for you. Myth number 3, police can't enter your home without a warrant. Now, it's a staple of legal dramas and TikTok and Know Your Rights videos.
When can police enter your home without a warrant? Police need a search warrant to enter your home, and they probably need an arrest warrant to enter your home. But if they have probable cause, I think would be the standard. If they have probable cause to believe that I think you committed a crime or something's happening in your house, so like a 911 call can get you there, or if they see you like run into your home, it's not like they're vampires and they can't go in. Can you do it without PC? I'm trying to think if you can do it without probable cause. I don't think you can, but
Police need a warrant to enter your house.
This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed.
Now, to be fair to Jesse Pinkman, this myth is based on a real rule. The 4th.
well, like, so that there, I think that I think this was by the book. I don't think he could enter that because he would need probable cause or a warrant to go in, right? I think.
Not be harassed.
Now, to be fair to Jesse Pinkman, this myth is based on a real rule. The 4th Amendment does protect your home from unreasonable searches and seizures. Generally, the police need a warrant to enter your residence, but there are so many exceptions to the warrant rule that they almost swallow the whole 4th Amendment. If you've ever lived in LA and participated in our city's national pastime, watching car chases on live TV, you know just how common it is for suspects on the run to drive home like they're sliding into home base yelling safe.
Oh no, oh no.
But that's not how any of this works. Here's how it really works. A warrantless
They will keep saying exigent circumstances. Yes, it's probable cause. Yes.
entry is usually considered unconstitutional unless it falls into a recognized exception like consent, hot pursuit, plain view, search incident to arrest, stop and frisk, special needs/administrative searches, and the automobile exception.
I thought stop and frisk, did that get tossed for constitutionality in New York, or did they just rescind the policy?
But the biggest exception to the warrant requirement is exigent circumstances. Under that doctrine, police can enter a dwelling without a warrant if there's an emergency, like someone is in danger, a suspect is about to flee, or evidence is about to be destroyed. Now that seems straightforward enough, but it's not. Imagine this, the police are chasing a suspect through an apartment complex. They lose track of him but smell marijuana coming from one of the units. They knock, loudly announce themselves as police, and then hear movement inside. The police officers think they hear people scrambling and a toilet flushing. Convinced evidence is being destroyed, the officers kick in the door and find drugs. But here's the twist. The suspect they were chasing wasn't even inside because the cops entered the wrong apartment. Now that happened in a real case called Kentucky versus King. The defendant in that apartment argued the police shouldn't have been allowed to enter without a warrant because the police themselves created the emergency by knocking and announcing their...
Exigent circumstances and probable cause do not mean the same thing. No, but I'm pretty sure exigent circumstances would fall under the umbrella of probable cause, would give you probable cause. If you hear somebody screaming inside of a house like they're being murdered, right, you would have, at the very least, reasonable suspicion that a crime is being committed, and you'd have a reason to break in, I would imagine, if that doesn't go up to the level of probable cause or whatever. Like, I imagine... Like you couldn't just say exigent circumstances because I think the house looks ugly or something. You would need some rationale or reason. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not to the same level as probable cause or something. But
presence. The Supreme Court sided with the police. As long as officers act lawfully by knocking and announcing, they're not barred from entering if they hear sounds suggesting evidence is being destroyed, even if the suspect isn't inside. And if the people inside react in a way that makes officers reasonably believe evidence is being destroyed, the cops can enter without a warrant. And there's an iconic scene at the end of Goodfellas where Karen Hill, panicked and desperate, races to the bathroom and flushes a stash of cocaine down the toilet just as the FBI closes in. And this is a textbook example of why the exigent circumstances exception exists. If the police had waited outside to get a warrant, the evidence would be long gone. And the law allows for that kind of split-second judgment. So while the Fourth Amendment does offer strong protections for your home, the phrase "you need a warrant" isn't a magic shield. If the police smell drugs, hear flushing toilets, or think someone's in danger, they might not need one. Now, if you believe any of these legal myths, you'll probably want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, let my law firm, the Eagle Team, help. If you've got in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got a data breach letter saying your information might have been leaked, or dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. And by the way, we don't get
Exigent circumstances would include situations where no crime is suspected. Really? What's an example of an exigent circumstance where a crime isn't suspected? Maybe it could, and I just can't think of it, but I'm trying to think of one where it would be, because I feel like every exigent circumstance is going to be, you think that there's a crime being committed, no? An overdose, the fire is burning down a house, grandma fell and can't get out. Oh. Okay, true, I guess, yeah. That would give even an ordinary citizen, I imagine, could break and enter in those circumstances, right? But I guess that's true, sure.
get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number on screen for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need...
Why do people keep saying this? The fertility clinic bombing was done by an anti-natalist. Do people just not like Natalie, or was she the owner of the fertility clinic, or...
Eagle team. So, okay, you're busted. At least this is America, where our Constitution explicitly states that everyone is entitled to their day in court. Ah, such a comforting thought. I think you know where this is going. Myth number 4, everyone is entitled to their day in court. Now, in America, we do things by the book. And that means that if someone has wronged you, or you were wrongfully accused, you get your chance to face off to prove your truth. It sounds like a constitutional promise. And yes, the Constitution does talk about trials. Article 3, Section 2 says, a trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury. The Sixth Amendment guarantees that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. In 1968, the Supreme Court established that the right to a jury trial is a fundamental right applicable to the states through the 14th Amendment. That's all true. But here...
If they believe there's an exception of exigent circumstances and push into a home where they believe evidence is being destroyed and they genuinely believe it to be the case but found unlawful later on, would the punishment be lower? Well, if it was found unlawful, then I believe that it's that fruit of the poison tree doctrine or whatever. That would mean that that all the evidence past that was acquired, that couldn't have been acquired otherwise would be thrown out. But if they had good reason to believe it, then according to the case he just cited, then it seems like, well, no, you probably, you would be allowed to keep that evidence, is what it sounds like. Can they search your place without a warrant under those circumstances too? It seems like it would only allow them to enter your property. My guess on how this is going to work is if a police officer enters your property due to exigent circumstances, they're probably not allowed to like toss your place or do a whole bunch of searching. But like, let's say they come in. So like when I got swatted, right? I have I had like 15 pounds of cocaine in my bedroom. I was super nervous, okay? Because I'm a Miami drug lord. That's what I do down here. And I was like, oh, fuck. So when they started knocking on the door, I was like, Nathan, quick, toss the coke to the bottom floor. We have like a little conveyor system where the cocaine goes whoop, over the railing, and then it goes into the neighbor's floor below, as long as I've been talking to them. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. Don't arrest me. Don't come to my house. I imagine that when they came in, they check everything, they see everything is fine, that's cool or whatever. I imagine, I don't know 100%, but if I had drugs like buried in my closet, I doubt that they could dig through my closet and look for stuff. But if they came in and I just have like cocaine laying all over the floor or whatever, and it's like I think plain view is the expression he used, and it's just like you could see it, then you are in trouble, right? I think that same standard is used for when a cop pulls you over. If a police officer pulls you over, he can't just start searching your car for no reason. I'm trying to remember what gives the cop the right to search your car. I don't think, even if you do a traffic infraction, I don't think they have a right to search your whole car just because you were like speeding. I don't think. I don't remember now, but I don't think. But if they were to see something illegal laying in your back seat, that does give them PC to search your car and maybe arrest you even, but yeah.
Here's why people believe that everyone is entitled to their day in court. The right to a trial is not absolute. In criminal court, the right to a jury trial only kicks in if the offense is considered serious. In Baldwin versus New York, the Supreme Court ruled that crimes punishable by more than 6 months in jail are serious enough to require a jury trial.
I think that's why they ask to search cars. Correct. Generally speaking, this is a general thing, okay? General thing. If a cop is asking you for something, it's because they can't do it, okay? If a cop has a search warrant, or if a cop has a right to search your car because you fucked up and you said something, you did something, or they saw something, the cop's not gonna be like, can I search your car? The cop's gonna say, sir, I need you to step out of your car. And they're going to search. If they're asking you, it's because they probably don't have the evidentiary standard to search, generally speaking. Now, that might not always be true. Maybe they're just being polite or whatever. Like, that could be the case as well. But just always remember that. If a cop is asking, okay, it's because they probably... That's like one of the few things that I feel like are in movies or TV shows. Actually, no, I feel like all of... Is this retarded? Most of, I think, the Better Call Saul and the Breaking Bad stuff, I feel like was fairly legally accurate. Because I think Mike Ehrmantraut says that at one point. He's like, listen, if you guys want to arrest me, then I imagine you would fucking arrest me. If you ask me questions, it's because you ain't got shit, which is generally true, although they might be asking to try to find even more stuff. But
Baldwin versus New York, the Supreme Court ruled that crimes punishable by more than 6 months in jail are serious enough to require a jury trial. But for petty offenses with lighter penalties, you might face a judge, not a jury. And even when trial is possible, over 90%...
Can you explain what begging the question means? Not well, apparently. I think I mix it up sometimes with a tautology, which is where you define a thing with the thing itself. So, like, I would argue, what is a woman? Is a female? I feel like that's kind of tautological. You're just defining the word with the same word. Begging the question generally refers to asking a question where the answer is essentially given in the premise. But I feel like when I give examples of this, I feel like I might mix it up with a tautology a lot. So, for instance, earlier, that guy said that good culture produces good intuitions. So we should just follow our intuitions. But I feel like, I think I said, I feel like that's a form of begging the question, because it's like, well, hold on. Well, what's a good intuition? Like, is my intuition good? Well, of course it's good, because we're in a good culture, and that good culture produces good intuition. So it's like, you're not really answering anything. It feels kind of circular. I'm pretty sure, I think begging the question and tautologies are fairly related, but no one's ever corrected me on it, so get fucked. Boom! Just like how nobody pointed out Saudi Arabia wasn't part of the Abraham Accord.
But for petty offenses with lighter penalties, you might face a judge, not a jury. And even when trial is possible, over 90% of criminal cases end in plea deals, not courtroom battles. So you may be entitled to a trial in theory, but in practice, most people never have one. And in civil cases, you're not automatically guaranteed a full-blown trial at all. Most lawsuits never make it that far. They get dismissed, settled, or decided through motions like summary judgment, where the judge rules there's no need for a trial because the law clearly favors one side.
True.
And of course, we've all seen Harvey Specter settle a billion-dollar lawsuit over bourbon and banter in the span of a single afternoon. But in real life, civil cases often drag on.
You say raises the question. A lot of people say begging the question, because raises the question is the appropriate expression. Raises the question just means that somebody's brought something up that is questionable, right? Like, oh, like you came home at 3 a.m. last night smelling of cigarette smoke. This raises a question of whether or not you were smoking or something. I don't know. Raises. People usually say this begs the question. It usually mean raises the question. Same thing with like equivocate and equate. Usually people say equivocate when they just mean equate. Equate is when you make two things appear similar or equivalent, and then equivocate is when you're mincing words. We're using euphemistic jargon.
On for years, and that's because in civil cases, there's no such thing as a right to a speedy trial, although that also depends state by state. But there are also legal doctrines that make it hard for litigants to ever get their day in court. A major example is qualified immunity, a doctrine often invoked by police and government officials in civil rights cases. It shields them from liability unless the plaintiff can show that the official violated clearly established law. Defendants can appeal a denial of qualified immunity before trial, triggering years of appellate. We've all seen Harvey Specter courtroom battles. So you may be entitled to a trial in theory, but in practice, most people never have one. And in civil cases, you're not automatically guaranteed a full-blown trial at all. Most lawsuits never make it that far. They get dismissed, settled, or decided through motions like summary judgment, where the judge rules there's no need for a trial because the law clearly favors one side. And of course, we've all seen Harvey Specter settle a billion-dollar lawsuit over bourbon and banter in the span of a single afternoon. But in real life, civil cases often drag on for years, and that's because in civil cases, there's no such thing as a right to a speedy trial, although that also depends state by state. But there are also legal doctrines that make it hard for litigants to ever get their day in court. A major example is qualified immunity, a doctrine often invoked by police and government officials in civil rights cases. It shields them from liability unless the plaintiff can show that the official violated clearly established law. Defendants can appeal a denial of qualified immunity before trial, triggering years of appellate delay, while various courts try to determine whether a person has the right to sue the officers. So while you're technically suing, you might be stuck in legal limbo without ever setting foot in a courtroom. In Hollywood, justice is always served in 42 minutes plus commercials. But
okay, sorry. That qualified immunity thing only applies to civil cases. People keep saying qualified immunity means that cops or people are shielded or immune from crimes, and that's not the case. I've heard a lot of people say that after the Trump versus United States thing.
But in the real world, your day in court may be hundreds of days waiting for the court to decide whether you're even allowed to ask for one. Which is why it's usually best to avoid trial in the first place, which you can do with this one neat trick. Just declare yourself a sovereign citizen. Myth number 5, the sovereign citizen loophole. Now, some Americans believe
Wait. Begging the question does not require a question to be asked. Oh, that could be true too. Sure.
do with this one neat trick. Just declare yourself a sovereign citizen. Myth number 5, the sovereign citizen loophole. Now, some Americans believe the government has no power over them because they're sovereign citizens, independent, self-governing individuals immune to the laws that apply to the rest of us. They've got a laundry list of legal theories to back this up, including the belief that they don't have to pay taxes and that the U.S. legal system has no jurisdiction over them. And you've probably seen some sweet, sweet justice shatter their delusions.
I'll step out of the vehicle for $500. And you can search me for $500 cash. I'll get in the car for $500.
But what you might not know about this stupid movement is that it's based on a legal theory inspired by a printer's error. The sovereign citizen idea originated with a group founded by Christian minister William Gale in the 1970s. His group, Posse Comitatus, believed that there was no higher authority than the county sheriff. It began as a group peddling your everyday stock racism and anti-Semitism, but when they started talking about the evils of taxation, the movement really took off. Which brings me to the printer's error that animates their legal theory. Sovereign citizens are 13thers, people who believe there is a secret 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, in the real world, the actual 13th Amendment, the one ratified by the states, abolished slavery. But 13thers think that an older amendment which failed to pass is actually the law of the land. The Titles of Nobility Amendment was a proposed amendment to the Constitution that would have stripped United States citizenship from any citizen who accepted a title of nobility from an emperor, king, prince, or foreign power. Congress passed it in 1812 during the panic about Napoleon's brother marrying an American citizen. You know, what happened if their son tried to become king of America? And freaking out about Napoleon's American nephew is like worrying about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's daughter one day becoming queen of America. And Americans eventually figured that out, but a majority of the states never ratified the Nobility Amendment, and it's not part of the Constitution. Do you hear me, 13thers? It's not a real amendment. However, in 1815, a Philadelphia printing house made the mistake of including the unratified amendment in its volumes. The error was not fixed until 1845. So for 30 years, untold volumes of text went out in the world representing that the 13th Amendment had passed ratification. But when the real 13th Amendment passed ratification and abolished slavery, the consequences were seismic enough to clear up any confusion about the typo. But that didn't stop conspiracy theorist David Dodge in the early 1980s from finding himself a copy of the Constitution with this error and having a big eureka but stupid moment. He concocted an elaborate conspiracy that this secret 13th Amendment actually invalidates the entire U.S. justice system. Why? Because lawyers and judges have titles. Lawyers use the title Esquire, and judges are known as the Honorable or, Your Honor. So sovereign citizens think that lawyers and judges, through licensure, accept titles and therefore are no longer American citizens. Now, all of this, of course, has been thoroughly rejected by the courts. So sadly, I can't force anyone to call me Sir Devon Stone, defender of the sovereign laws, or legal eagle, baron of the bench, and titles of nobility are already banned by the Constitution. See Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8. So America doesn't have an official aristocracy. When a lawyer dies, their children don't inherit the law license. And lawyers are still U.S. citizens, at least for now. But it doesn't matter how many times the courts slap this theory down, people just won't give up on it. And sovereign citizen lore is beloved by jailhouse lawyers, inmates who know just enough law to file long-winded legal briefs arguing the courts.
Do you find it a bit strange that racism and anti-Semitism are separate terms? Not really. I feel like anti-Semitism is a pretty special thing that has manifested in different ways throughout a lot of history. It's probably worth it to call it out. And it's not necessarily accurate to call it just racism because it feels like a bit more than that. But even racism has become, because we're so advanced in our racism these days, society has such advanced conceptualizations of what it means to be racist, right? Like, are you a white separatist or are you a white supremacist? Are you a there's just so many different types of racism. It feels like even just racism itself needs more qualifications, It's like that one from that scene Civil War or whatever, where the guy's like, what kind of American are you? Right? It's like, what kind of racist are you?
Courts do not have any jurisdiction over their cases. And you can probably excuse people with no legal training who barely have access to a law library from falling into the sovereign citizen trap. But this bogus legal theory has also been championed by people who should know better, like the Iowa Republican Party. Iowa Republicans put the missing 13th Amendment into their 2010 party platform. And they tried to argue that President Obama forfeited his citizenship by accepting an award from the Nobel Prize Committee, which was apparently a foreign state. And although this is funny in the abstract, conspiracy theories can have some serious consequences. Over the years, the movement has fanned out from its anti-Semitic and racist origins. The sovereign citizen movement now attracts people of every race, religion, and political persuasion. Unfortunately, I mean, we're all for diversity and equality, but maybe not about something that's incredibly stupid. But sovereign citizens have been known to file notices of liens against property for the purpose of harassing the true owner. And this tactic, which has been called paper terrorism, clouds title to real estate and other property. People espousing sovereign citizen theory produce fake arrest warrants, forge banknotes, and even issue their own currency, which I shouldn't have to tell you this, are very much crimes. But let's say that doesn't stop you from picking up some criminal charges. You finally get your day in court, and you're feeling optimistic that the jury's going to find you not guilty for all the wacky sovereign citizen crime you definitely did not do, you rascal, because all the state's evidence is circumstantial. Myth number 6, all the evidence is circumstantial, they'll never convict me. You've heard it in courtroom dramas, shouted by defendants who think they've found a loophole. You can't convict me, all the evidence is just merely circumstantial. Even Law & Order is guilty of this one.
There's circumstantial evidence and a statement from his son. Now, this won't do at all.
And the idea is that if there's no smoking gun, no eyewitnesses, and no confession, then the prosecution doesn't have a case. But here's the truth. Circumstantial evidence is not only admissible, it's often just as strong and sometimes stronger than what we call direct evidence. But let's define some terms.
Destiny, quote, healthy prejudices come from healthy cultures. What does it mean for a culture to be healthy? What a worthless statement, end quote. From older video, but was this just bait? Do you not understand what this would mean? I understand what it means. Do you understand what it means? when we talk about a healthy culture, we're not talking about a culture that just values people being in good health and being happy and whatever. There is a moral claim that's being smuggled in there, of course, right? So they would say something like a healthy culture doesn't have women or boys turning into girls or two men kissing each other, whatever, right? That's the point of his statement, is to smuggle in those beliefs that he doesn't want to have to justify rationally. He would rather just intuit them and then say, therefore, they ought to be accepted as true.
Terms here. Direct evidence is evidence that directly proves a key fact at issue without needing any inferences. So an example is an eyewitness saw the crime, a video, or the weapon used in the crime. And circumstantial evidence is evidence that requires an inference to connect it to a conclusion. Examples include forensic evidence such as fingerprints and bloodstains, or documentary evidence like business records or text messages. If a witness testifies that they saw you stab someone, that's direct evidence. But if they say they saw you leave the victim's house at midnight covered in blood and then watched you toss a knife into a storm drain, well, that's circumstantial. But that seems pretty strong.
I wish he would have put this at the beginning of the fucking video. God, this is one of the most misunderstood things. And to hear Hassan abuse this is so fucking annoying, whatever.
And a jury can convict you on that evidence alone. And that's why juries are routinely instructed that the law makes no distinction between the weight or value to be given to either direct or circumstantial.
Go.
Now, the Miranda warning, which starts
I didn't mean to do that. Fuck.
into, because all the state's evidence is circumstantial. Even law and order circumstantial evidence. Witness saw the crime, a video, or the forensic saw you stab someone, toss a knife into a storm drain. Well, that's circumstantial. But that seems pretty strong. And a jury can convict you on that evidence alone. And that's why juries are routinely instructed that the law makes no distinction between the weight or value to be given to either direct or circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is not a lesser form of proof. It's just a different kind.
Wait. At Destiny, to your shitty chess analogy, in what way is being cruel to victims a meaningful move in the game of chess? Quote, they did it first, end quote. Is always your response, and it's cringe. Please find a new response. No, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry if being a human makes you uncomfortable or you don't want to accept this part about yourself. But in-group, out-group stuff and being cruel to people is an incredibly powerful motivating force for a lot of political movements. Being able to identify out-group people and to make fun of them is a super empowering thing for every human being. As shitty as it is, like if you're a quote-unquote good person, then you feel good when you're watching a movie and the Nazis get killed or the Klansmen get murdered, or, you know, if it's politics, you feel good when a political opponent hopefully doesn't get murdered or whatever, but like, you know, when there's a mass shooting or something, you're always cheering for it to be the other guy's person instead of your person, and that's probably not stemming from some super virtue-driven place. It's stemming from a desire to shit on the other side. There is a value, however barbaric or however sad or however whatever you want to call it. I mean, it sucks, but it's a facet of humanity that being able to make fun of people and being able to attack people on something just feels good, and it gives you a degree of political power in order to do it, in order to mobilize your base around that divisive messaging. If that wasn't the case, then nobody would do it, right? There's a reason why people engage in this sort of rhetoric so much. People want to see Steven Crowder, fake choking when they pretend that what he went through or whatever was the exact same as what George Floyd went through to prove that it was bullshit. People like making jokes and memes about Paul Pelosi and his gay lover, and like there's power there. There's actual political power being. People like it when Donald Trump calls certain veterans losers who got captured in war. Like people don't do this to sabotage themselves. They do it because they're demonstrating, whether you understand it or not, they're demonstrating they're in a position of power. To demonstrate the position of power that I'm in and the power that I have over somebody else, I'm going to attack that person, and we're going to laugh at it because I am the one that currently holds the power.
As the Supreme Court has long recognized, circumstantial evidence is not only sufficient, but also maybe more certain, satisfying, and persuasive than direct evidence. And in fact, most juries believe that DNA evidence is the gold standard for determining whether someone is guilty. But DNA evidence is generally considered circumstantial.
Thank you.
It does not directly prove a crime was committed, but it can be used to infer a connection between a person and the crime scene or an object. So
apparently Joe Biden has prostate cancer, but nobody cares because prostate cancer is an easy one to get over, and Joe Biden's going to get through this no problem.
Circumstantial evidence isn't lesser evidence. Pop culture gets that wrong a lot. But lawyers can definitely attack the inferences drawn from the circumstantial evidence. And when it comes to destroying circumstantial...
It's in the bone? So get another bone. Who cares? Liquid Snake literally got a whole new fucking arm. Or Ocelot did. I don't remember. Somebody did. He'll be fine.
Evidence. No movie has ever been more accurate than My Cousin Vinny.
What is this rusty, dusty, dirty-looking thing over your window?
It's a screen.
A screen. It's a screen.
He is walking the witness down a logical path that he's not going to be able to get out of, which is that there's a lot of stuff between his vantage point and the events that he is an eyewitness to. And the eponymous Vinny doesn't argue that the evidence is invalid because it's circumstantial. He just shows that it leads to the wrong conclusion. Now, My Cousin Vinny's mastery of circumstantial evidence is a big reason why I called it the perfect legal movie, and that's because of its screenwriter, Dale Launer. And if you love the movie like I do, you can check out the extended cut of my interview with the screenwriter on today's sponsor, Nebula, where we really get into the legal nuances of this masterpiece of courtroom drama. And for limited time, you can can get a lifetime membership for Nebula. You can buy once and then never again. Is the greatest deal of all. Now, we've really been active on Nebula this year with tons of Nebula exclusive videos, like our analysis of how RFK Jr. can legally or not legally ban vaccines, or our video on unhinged judges that went too far. It's also the only place to watch my feature-length documentary, Bad Law Words Good, and a bunch of videos about lawsuits and topics that are way too not safe for work for YouTube. Because on Nebula, you can watch all of our videos ad-free and early, because our videos always go up on Nebula first. And you can check out tons of original videos from your favorite creators like Johnny Harris, Neo, Jetlag, Real Engineering, Real Life Lore, and hundreds more. And in particular, you can watch the Nebula original series called Modern Conflict by Real Life Lore, which just dropped a gripping documentary about the manhunt for El Chapo. I highly recommend checking that out. Because what's truly special about Nebula is a creator-owned platform built by me and other YouTubers and podcasters. And because it's a subscription service, we get to work on larger, higher budget productions than we could anywhere else. It's become the go-to place where creators can make content their audiences love, free from the constraints of the algorithm or unwanted outside pressure. Wow. And for those of you that want to share everything Nebula has to offer with your friends and family, Nebula is now offering an annual gift card. If you sign up using my link that's on screen right now, you can give a year of Nebula to a friend for 40% off the yearly subscription, a year of the best content for just $36. And that's a gift that you can give to yourself, by the way, because you deserve it. Or you can check out the lifetime subscription where for $300, you can get access to Nebula forever. We're investing in even more big concept, high octane Nebula originals, and your lifetime subscription goes towards that investment. In a way, lifetime is the best possible deal of all. Either way, you'll get all my videos early, get access to exclusives, and support the ambitious projects that my friends and I are working on our own streaming site. So sign up now and get you or a friend 40% off the incredible lifetime deal by clicking on the link below. After that, click on this link over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.
Damn.
It is for suspects on the run.
See you in court, bro.
Why is it?
Oh, another super quiet video? Yes.
Are we going to be surprised at what you learned?
You know what, Maria? Cash is not kidding. We've been personally briefed extensively on every single detail, nugget, tendril of this case. One is actively in court right now, so out of respect for the case, it's probably more appropriate that I stay quiet on that. However, I'm not going to tell people what they want to hear. I'm going to tell you the truth, and whether you like it or not is up to you. If there was a big explosive there.
Uh-oh. Wait, is he preparing people for the gentle letdown, or?
Right? Given my history as a Secret Service agent and my personal friendship as a director does with the president, give me one logical, sensible reason we would not have. If you can think of one, there isn't. In some of these cases, the there you're looking for
is not there.
Is not there.
Oh! Yes! I've been saying this for 10 years! And now the conservatives are in power, and now they're saying the same shit? No shit, motherfucker. There's not a giant fucking conspiracy. There is no fucking deep state. There was no top-down COVID virus manufacturing plant in China. There was no Epstein, Hillary Clinton kill list. Yeah, no, none of it's fucking there, you fucking retard.
And I know people, I get it. I understand.
Yeah, because you fuckers have been telling people there have been for years.
It's not there. If it was there, we would have told you.
Are we going to be surprised at what you learned?
You know what, Maria?
My God. Oh, sorry, hold on. Another quick Breaking Bad glaze. Just real quick. I don't know if I've seen this guy in other TV shows. He was in Dexter or whatever. He was like, okay, whatever, cop performance. Super ultra forgettable character. Another guy who unbelievably stepped the fuck up for Breaking Bad and just gave a fucking legendary performance. Oh my God. Legendary. Yeah, and even better in Better Call Saul. Holy shit. I just feel like they found so many actors that were like not bad actors, but just kind of like meh people, and they just gave their performances of a lifetime.
A question we talk about a lot amongst ourselves on the show right now is, what timeline are we in, and how will we know? Are we watching the fundamental erosion of American democracy?
You're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said no, other than day one.
Of its liberties?
LOL. He posted online a picture of himself in a crown with the phrase, "Long live the king."
Of its safeguards?
Sure, but you always had a hunch that these stories were just conspiracies, but how is it a bad thing that people actually investigated thoroughly to draw strong? Because it already was investigated thoroughly. You just didn't believe until the right person told you. It's the equivalent of I don't know. It's the equivalent of like a kid hearing the same thing 50 million times from one parent, and then when the other parent tells it to them, they're like, oh, okay, now I believe it. It's just stupid.
I don't know. I think I'm not allowed to run again. I'm not sure. Am I allowed to run again?
Are we on a path that is quickly becoming irreversible? Or are we in the timeline where the Trump administration is doing a lot, but to the extent it has a fundamental plan?
And disagreements about prejudice. Why is the drag not working? Oh. Hello, what do you want?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just a little confused. How could you ever define a culture without prejudice being like the center point of it?
What? Can we short circuit? Can I just play this whole argument and fast forward and you tell me if we're going to go somewhere different? You're going to say prejudice is an important part of the culture. I'm going to say, well, what do you mean by prejudice? And then instead of appealing to the most commonly thought form of prejudice, which is like racial discrimination, you're going to say, well, prejudice is actually like an intuitive function that everybody has that helps them very quickly and easily distinguish between people that are probably good for society and people that are bad for society. So for instance, people that are robbing and thieving and drug addicts and everything else, and people who are, you know, like good people who are volunteering at soup kitchens and whatnot. And then I'm going to go, oh, okay, well, in that case, I guess that type of prejudice or that type of discrimination is good. That's just not typically how we use the word. And then we're going to agree on that at the end of the day. Is that where we're going with this?
No, I wouldn't moralize it. I don't think there's a moral...
then back up. Okay, ask me the question again. Then go.
So how would you define culture if you don't have prejudice? It's almost like you need
defining culture. Culture is just like a set of values that a group of people or some organization or collection of people have, I guess, right?
But where do the values come from, right? It's history. It has to be informed by something. It doesn't just appear out of thin air.
Okay, sure.
So if the values are like, we define like the good values almost like in the positive, as in like things like rights or things like achievements, the negative is as essential, the things that are not a part of the culture, the things that are the enemy of the culture.
Okay.
So if you don't have prejudices,
what is this? How are you defining prejudice here? Prejudice is just the thing you're not?
It would be like a cultural, like, I'm trying to think of how you'd say it.
Because if you're going to define this as like, well, prejudice is just having an antithesis of a thing, and then you're asking me like, can you have a thing without the antithesis of a thing? Well, then I mean, tautologically,
it's not just the antithesis. It's like things that fall outside of the circle, things that are against.
Of course, necessarily any circle is going to have things that fall outside of the circle. Like you can't be an Xbox fan if the only console that existed was an Xbox. You would just be a console fan. So Xbox fans necessarily like have PlayStations on the outgroup, right?
Yeah, but are you saying that, so that if you have a prejudice, it has to be something that is somewhat, at least at the cultural level, that's not entirely logical, right?
Why does it, what part of that necessitates not being logical?
Because, so say, for instance, like a more egregious form of prejudice, like racism, like even if you had someone who argued that racism was like, you know, culturally informed or logically informed in some way, part of the idea of it being a cultural phenomena is that you have to have a almost like just an innate drive that is installed by the culture against that thing. You would apply to any prejudice, I think, where it would have to be something that's not just, it's not just something that's like reasoned upon, it's something that's like almost like just gifted to you as a birthright.
Is that necessarily all prejudice?
I would say that's where you'd start, at least, I think.
I feel like you can get. I feel like there are a whole bunch of different types of prejudices. Okay, wait. So how are you defining prejudice here? I guess
prejudice would just be. I think like it would be a cultural negative, something that's outside of the culture, and
that just sounds like you're. It sounds like you're just talking about like an antithesis or a thing that's not, or like a definition or a distinction.
An antithesis needs a thesis. It needs something to counterpoint.
Okay, sorry, not antithesis. It's like saying that like you're identifying like A. Well, in order to have A, don't you have to say then not B and not C and not D? Like sure, but
I don't think it's that.
You're defining prejudice. I just don't mean when you say you're defining prejudice by things that aren't in the culture.
Or how it's rejected by the culture is probably better.
Things that are rejected by the culture.
Yes, like you would say that are things that are uniformly by the general culture disregarded or not. They're not deemed to be appropriate within the culture.
Yeah, but I just don't think people use prejudice that way.
Well, even if they don't use it that way, I think it's like when he's talking about Burke, I'm pretty sure what he's describing is explicitly that, where it's.
I don't care what Burke is describing. The quote that he was using from Burke there was being weaponized to appeal to intuitions for our moral values.
Well, because they are intuitions somewhat. They're cultural intuitions.
I think a cultural intuition about a thing that's good or bad, I think, is a little bit different than just saying that every culture has to have things that it doesn't include. No,
it's not just not including. It's like rejecting. It's like saying, making it a villain. How about that? Perhaps.
Yeah, but
like
the issue isn't talking. He wasn't saying that every culture needs to reject things. He was arguing about how we arrive at those rejections. Like he was saying that the rejections that we arrive at need to be intuitive and common sense and not rationalized. Whereas I would agree that like prejudices can obviously be good. Like some form, we all engage in forms of discrimination, not necessarily racial discrimination, but like if I want to have a new bride, I'm probably age discriminating. I don't want somebody who's 4 years old, right? I mean, like we all engage in, or if I want somebody who's going to be a laborer, like a construction worker, I don't want like an 82-year-old grandpa, right? So
yeah, these are like logical. When you're describing that, like there's a sort of like logic map that you could develop, and that the culture probably has already like explained. It's something you'd learn. Like, well, you wouldn't have someone who's 80 working as a laborer because they wouldn't be efficient. But prejudices, I think, refer to like they have to be things like divorce somewhat from logic. They have to be things that the culture defines itself on as like almost like a historical fact,
like what,
like disregard for another.
Wait, like why?
Because that's what culture is. It's about having, it's what politics is. It's about having the friend-enemy distinction. You have your friends, you have your enemies. Your
yeah, but
enemies
why do
will
those
also
have to be? But those enemies can be rationally defined. They don't have to be irrationally inherited. I mean, oftentimes they are inherited just because we don't have time to think through every single thing. But there should be a rational. Like, what's an example of a prejudice that's good, or that we would say like a culture should have this type of prejudice? It's not rationally defensible.
I don't know if it's just about being good though. I think it's just like it's almost like a fact of culture. You have to have them. Like you have to. They have to be a part of the conversation.
Why? Like what? Like what's an example of one? Like a prejudice you have to have that can't be rationally defined.
An example of that would be, I think that in America, I think even if you get into a situation like Donald Trump, you have to sort of irrationally maybe, or it could be defined, that's why I think rationality and reason are different, but you'd have to irrationally defend the American system because it's a part of your identity. Your cultural identity is about respecting the form of government.
Well, wait, why is that necessarily irrational?
Because in this example, the Trump thing or whatever, say you get to a point where you could make a rational argument, and a strong one that most of the world would agree with, that the American system is not sustainable if you have someone like a Trump figure arise, and that it destroys the system or it unfolds it, and that there might be like ways that we would be able to stir up the system that would necessarily defy like things like the Constitution. It wouldn't matter if there are like very strong rational arguments that even your own countrymen are giving you, because you don't have an identity at that point nationally. You don't have a politics if you have to reject what you get your identity from, your culture from.
Okay, back up and tell me, first of all, are you like a phenomenologist or something? Is that what we're doing right now?
I mean, I respect a lot of that writing, but no, I wouldn't say I'm that.
Okay, back up. What do you think we disagree on? Can you elucidate?
I think that from what I listened, I think your worldview would encourage all cultures to move towards like an empirically informed model, and then just sort of dissolve culture until you have a set of like rational movements that sort of just like intersect with one another.
When you say what part is being empirically informed, like the actual moral foundations or the actual intuitive foundations of those cultures, or
you could say, maybe you don't have to say empirically informed, rationally informed, in that things like the positives and negatives of culture would have to go through rational calculus always, and that the result or the goal would be to reduce your system to being as rational as possible.
I guess the problem is that it depends on like the layer or the level that you're. I don't know if I have the philosophical vocabulary to navigate this conversation, but the rationality part would have to be applied to a certain contextual layer, where I would argue that rationality is always essential, but then there are layers of the conversation where the rationality might not necessarily be essential. So for instance, a person's religious belief, I would say, could probably defy rationality, but it's not important there. But if we were to decide that we wanted to cure people of HIV, well, we would need to apply strict rationality to how we do functions related to medication or like doctoring, like medicine. Like that would have to be a rational process. But we're like on a different level, I guess, there of empirics or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I guess maybe my language is off. But like, why do you think that you'd have to apply? Like, why is rationality the important thing and not reason?
You're gonna have to define the two different things here for me. Or what's the distinction between rationality and reason here?
I guess the distinction would be that like, if the whole range of like acceptable human thought and experience would be something like reason, like that would be the container. Like if you're talking about things that are true and real, but the container is reason. Rationality is just the way that you can arrange that reason. So for instance, you know how you You could take two arguments and you could conceptually make two equally rational statements that don't contradict one another, but that like it's an impasse. So the easy example, if you just brought up religion, that's the whole point of apologetics, right? So you have Islamic and Christian apologetics. You can get two rational arguments, but doesn't prove one or the other, if that makes sense.
Well, don't apologetics seek to prove themselves?
Rationally, but not through reason. They can't like, they're not like, what's the word? They're something that should like, I guess, they're supposed to answer theological questions within the faith, but they can't gift faith to someone else.
Sure.
If that
Okay.
makes sense.
So the issue that I would have, I guess, or the reason why I believe that rationality is important at some point, is that if you have people that have applied, so tell me if you agree with this statement. I think based on what you said, we could agree with this statement, right? A Muslim and a Christian could both apply perfect rationality within some reason, and both of them could arrive at a different conclusion about, like, say, gay marriage without having performed any sort of actual error in deductive reasoning, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm saying that in a democracy, at least, we have to appeal to an additional layer of rationality is because we have to find a way to make incommensurate views functional in a society, right? Because at the end of the day, there's going to have to be a truth value on, is gay behavior legal or illegal? And we can't just have two people doing apologetics for their own religion to reconcile that. We're going to have to appeal to some, I don't know if you'd say substrate, or we'd have to appeal to some meta, up or down, I don't know, like layer of rationality to make these incommensurate views functional. We do this with like our criminal justice system, right? Or you tell me how, or how would you, or if you think I'm phrasing that poorly or whatever, you can tell me how you would reconcile with that. Yeah.
I would, because I think like, so for instance, like if we talk about like, so again, the container of reason is important, because when we talk about ethics, right? I think we're talking about we can talk about a lot of things. Things like morality are a part of ethics, but we would both agree the law is not a moral arbiter exclusively. The law is about justice, right? So
sure, but I would say the law is downstream from morality. I guess applying like the vocab we were just using, I would say like the law is like your rational / empirics, and then the morality is going to be this collection of different reasonable or reasoned moral positions from all of society. Like the law is just your... Okay, why not?
I would say the law is like more like, you could say it's like symmetrical to morality, maybe. They're both a part of ethics, where I think that if you want to say it's downstream from something, it's like an umbrella. They're under the umbrella of ethics, where law likes to deal when it can with moral issues, but oftentimes justice gets in the way of morality, right?
Like
so again,
how?
Morality
wait, what do you give me an example of that? What do you mean by that?
So an example would be that like morality we can construct in different ways. I'm not speaking in terms of relativism, but I'm saying like different people in the same country, let alone the same world, can construct of moral arguments that are sound, as in that people could find them reasonable, if not rational.
Okay.
But the law doesn't seek to differentiate those necessarily. It seeks to prove or provide a definitive answer on how to deal with a crime, how to deal with a problem.
Correct. But the identification of those crimes as crimes are fundamentally ethical questions, but those are ethical questions that have to be dealt with by people who might have incommensurate ethical systems, right? You might have a guy who has reasoned that gay marriage is wrong and another guy who's reasoned that gay marriage is right, and these people both need to codify some set of rules that criminalizes or decriminalizes that action, right?
Yes, well, the important part is with that is the punishment angle, because like think about, for instance, like
punishment is later. Punishment comes later. The important part is first getting the code, right?
Oh yeah, well, what's I wouldn't even say right or wrong. I would say permissible and like impermissible, right? That's probably more what it is, because morality likes to talk about right and wrong, but the law is just what is acceptable.
I feel like we're splitting hairs, but fine, we can say permissible or impermissible.
I really think it's splitting hairs, because that's the important part, is that like the American system, right, with gay marriage, I can believe morally that gay marriage is wrong in every way while still believing that it is absolutely legally permissible.
I don't agree with that. I don't think so. If you think a thing is wrong in every way, there's going to be some things like whatever your feeling is on gay marriage, I'm sure the feeling that a person would have on child rape is going to be a lot stronger. They're going to feel like that's wrong in every way. And I don't think a person would say, well, personally, I think that child rape is wrong in every way, but like I could live in a society where I guess it's legal to rape kids. Like that would be no shot. A person would never be able to handle that, right? Can the person? I think that the person can handle it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to think of like what it means. So again, like even in that extreme of an example, you could conceive of a person very easily that might have a warped personal system that wouldn't see extreme problems, but they can also recognize the legitimacy of the law. Sure, but what I'm saying is that I think that Well, for instance, if you had a society of people that were like that, then the law would reflect their view that child rape would be illegal, right?
Yes.
But what we have to have
actually,
is
not necessarily.
Well, let's assume that they make illegal things let's say that they want things that are wrong to also be impermissible, so that would translate to their system.
Well, I wouldn't assume that's the problem. I wouldn't assume that.
Sure, let's just assume it for the sake of that hypothetical. Then that would be the case, right?
I would just disagree with the hypothetical. Then it wouldn't make sense because I don't think that's.
It wouldn't make sense to assume that people who think that a thing is morally wrong would want to make that thing illegal.
As a collective, maybe, but I don't think that's what the law functions, especially in democracy.
Sure, I'm not saying that's what I'm saying. Just assume that they all could come together and vote on things. A group of people that think a certain thing is very wrong would probably try to make that thing illegal, generally speaking.
Okay, yeah.
If it's super wrong, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't understanding what you were saying.
Yeah, that's fine. But I think the issue is that it seems to be the case that there are wrongs that some people could never live with, and then there are wrongs that some people could live with in terms of other people committing them, and then in terms of them not being a crime. So, for instance, I think that everybody agrees that lying is wrong, but we seem to not criminalize lying unless it's done in very specific circumstances. But then there are some things like our malamenses or whatever, our rapes, our murders, our stealing, our vandalism, that everybody says these things are wrong, right? So there are these edge cases where I don't know how you get two people with different systems of reason or whatever, or in their reason, whatever you would say that, where I use gay marriage, abortion might be another issue, where you can have reasonable minds can have differing opinions. How do you reconcile the differing opinions and make them commensurate in some legal system?
Well, because that's the important, exactly that is how do you do that? The answer is the law is concerned with order before anything else. It's not morality, and the intersection of that is a plus.
No, but that's begging the question. When you say concerned with order is what the person morally feels it to be. No, like a person like a super Islamic or a super fundamentalist Christian would say a society that allows gay marriage is a disorderly society, a degenerative society. No.
That would be, that's a semantic distinction, though. I'm not saying that in like a negative way. I think semantics are important. But when I say order, I mean what the state can enforce. Like, what is the state capable of enforcing? Which is why, like, when the law is being practiced appropriately, it doesn't mean it's reasonable or rational. When it's practiced in a way where it functions, it means that the state is able to maintain what it considers to be the acceptable level of order.
Sure, but I mean, like the state can obviously regulate marriages. It's within the purview of the state to grant a marriage. So if there was anything that the state could regulate pretty predictably, it would be gay marriage.
Yeah, 100%.
So how do you make? So I'm just asking, like, how do you make? What do you appeal to make two incommensurate moral systems capable of agreeing on what a law ought to be around something like gay marriage?
Well, in the democratic system, for instance, the idea is that the majority strong arms minority. That's the point. Is that they use the state as a middleman to basically take away their ability to make that a part of at least the law, if not the culture.
Yeah, but we don't do that for all cases, right? Like, we might strong arm on some things, but the things that we strong arm on are going to be, like, I'm sure there are some group of people who believe that the age of consent should be 12, and we strong arm those people, but we don't strong arm people around, like abortion. We don't, even though some people might say we will, right? Like, different states have different laws on it, and different, lines are drawn, and that's an issue that people feel very strongly about. So I don't know if I would agree that, like, we just strong arm people. It seems like we have developed some rational process of trying to figure out which laws or which morals ought to be codified in law versus what morals are just things that we all agree are wrong or whatever. No?
Well, in the American system, like, you have the Constitution, which is that's the informing agent. That's like the cultural bedrock, whatever. But yeah, I mean, you still are having people. Every democratic decision is a strong arm, right? Because unless you have, there are some decisions, like you give the example of things like child sexual abuse. That's going to be like a 90-10 issue at worst in like any society. So of course it's like a much lighter strong arm. But the reason why you have something like abortion that's diversified is because those majorities flip depending where you are, right? That's why there's some ambiguity.
Sure. But again, it's like every time we have a majority, it doesn't necessarily mean we make a thing like legal or illegal, no? I feel like it depends on the extremeness of the particular thing.
If it's within the realms of like, not even constitutionality, because I don't think that really matters like in the immediate. It's more about can you get away with it? And we absolutely do. Like, that's how you get things like Japanese internment camps.
Sure. Although I think we recognize those as being kind of wrong, and we try to course correct from there and not do that stuff again.
All right, well, I wait. How is that? We have no comparable situation to a World War II scenario. How would we? I feel like that is just, again, if we had something that was equivalent, I don't know why we would.
Well, I mean, did we intern Vietnamese people in the Vietnam War? But I guess in my lifetime, the thing that I would compare it to is the comparable thing I would say in my lifetime was when we did the Iraq War. Like Bush and I think Obama had risks or high risk countries that they'd identified for immigration.
Yeah.
That was a large improvement versus just like locking up every Arab citizen, I would say, right?
But I think the point is that there's no existential threat with the Iraq War. Like it's not like having Pearl Harbor bombed with the actual risk of invasions from Mexico and our west borders, and it's not the same thing at all.
Sure. I mean, I'm trying to find a comparison. I mean, I agree it's not the same thing, of course, but
yeah. Well, I mean, that lack of comparison is important because I think that even if Americans fall into like,
sure, you're
weird
saying the
traps
comparison is disanalogous because any situation that I present isn't going to be the same. Like if a similar situation such as World War II came up again that presented the same existential threat to the country, then your claim is that we probably would repeat the exact same behavior, right?
Or not just the exact same, but we would have proportionate reactions probably. I don't think that I wouldn't say humans are very different from 2,000 years ago compared to now. I think they're pretty similar. It's just that there's different mechanisms that can give better safety. But I think people feel that safety is lacking, and they'll respond proportionally like World War II.
Okay. Yeah, that's possible. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Wait. So what are we agreeing or disagreeing right now? What are we arguing over?
I'm just I guess because I got a little tangent-y, but it's that the rationality part I think is a misnomer in the sense that we can construct like infinite rational perspectives for practically every society that I've ever read about. The difficulty is that, like, so in America, for instance, like we would have a prejudice against things like restrictive laws and speech, even if they're not only rationally reasonable, or sorry, rationally, I guess, like admissible or whatever, but or if there's like empirical evidence, like really strong, like can you imagine, for instance, say the EU has decades of studies on the effects of hate speech laws, and then you see there's huge reductions in people, hate crimes, in extremist views, whatever. That most reasonable people would then say, oh, well, obviously you'd want to have hate speech laws then, but the America perspective would still seek to reduce those laws as much as possible because of our prejudice against restrictive speech.
Gotcha. Would that be the best example to use though? Because we do have different laws relating to freedom of speech. Your main point might stand, but I guess I'm testing on this because like we do have a pretty extreme.
The reason why it's already important we have that differentiation is because we have a prejudice against. So the European system, for instance, from what I've seen, I'm not the most educated on it. Their laws are actually pretty well informed, as in they are empirically informed in that there's probably good reason for a lot of those countries to have more restrictive speech laws, and there are results that they can call upon that seem to demonstrate that. But America, regardless of what we see externally, I think it's an impossibly un-American position to accept that, even in like the reduced manners that exist today. But we could also envision more draconian speech laws that have significant impacts, or like with guns, right? Like we could see significant impacts in like the reductions of gun violence. But it's an un-American, untenable position to think about not allowing people to own guns.
Okay. Let me see if I can summarize what you're saying. Any collection of values that a group of people have would almost necessarily grant them a disposition that would prejudice them against certain types of ideas. And that would just almost be like an intrinsic property of, or it would be emergent naturally from a collection of people that believe in a certain set of things or whatever. That have certain, okay. If that's how
it could be people too. It could be people, it could be objects, it could be a lot of things.
Sure. If that's how we're using prejudice, I mean, I think I probably would agree with that. Like, I don't think any culture or person, like if I were to put in front of the American culture, if that was one person, if I were to put in front of the American culture, hey, here's a law that I have against computer monitors, and here's a law that I have against guns. Legality aside, Americans might balk at the gun one more than the monitor one because the gun one is more kind of baked into our culture, or right? Okay. Okay. So in that sense, I would say that as an abstraction, that like those types of prejudice can exist. When I was thinking of prejudice in the other video that came out, do you think that the guy was using prejudice in that way?
I think that, I mean, I don't know who that guy is, to be honest, but I mean, the vibe I got immediately is he's clearly like a sneaky MAGA conservative or what you call it, like counterculture conservative. Or whatever.
Sure.
Like,
I feel like
obviously
prejudice there was a placeholder for him, and instead what he was looking for was the argument really wasn't about like prejudice or racism. He was just saying that we need to be defining values based on our intuitive feelings more so than trying to rationalize any of them, with the goal being that more people would have an intuitive feeling towards his set of ethics versus some other set of ethics that could be argued for or defined. That sounded like more of the argument he was trying to make rather than this huge war around, I guess, like what a prejudice is or whatever. Yeah.
I think it's just more of like the prejudice thing's more like implicit. It's more obvious, I feel like, to that guy, or at least where he's pulling
like he was
from,
arguing against, like he was arguing in favor of basically like LGBTQ prejudice or racial prejudice, most likely is what he was arguing for. But I think people might try to like rationally fight against it. And there might be some prejudices. I'm using that word in like a very like the context here is like a prejudice is like a feeling that you would have to judge an individual that might be not necessarily rationally defined, but it might not be like abstracted from culture. Like these are prejudices that might be a good thing to fight against because they don't even necessarily serve a cultural or greater purpose. And I feel like those are the types of prejudices that he was fighting for, not like do cultures necessarily have an abstracted prejudice against things that aren't from their similar ideological foundation or something.
Yeah, because I think the difficulty with that is that I think the argument would be, and I think this is accurate, it would be the significant burden of proof on someone trying to fight a prejudice rather than accepting it.
There would be a significant burden of proof on somebody fighting a prejudice rather than accepting it. I think it would depend on what the prejudice is. Like if I were to come in, like I think that there are a set. So I would argue most or all of morality essentially comes from, I would say, like intuitions. I would say that most humans share intuitions around a lot of these things. If somebody were to come in and they were to argue in favor of something that on a moral level intuitively feels very, very, very wrong, and somebody were to say, oh, you're just being prejudiced. Like, actually, it would be great if we could set houses on fire. I would agree in that sense that, okay, well, we should probably have a really strong argument from the arsonist rather than forcing other people to necessarily defend why they don't like arson, perhaps. I've seen some political commentators, there was somebody I read a long time ago who wrote, there was an argument, but it had to do with like, there might be some sect of people who argue in society that you ought to be able to freely, I know that I use examples, but he used the example, like freely rape women. These probably aren't ideas that are worth debating because the intuition is so strong against it in society and the arguments are so lacking. Like it would be on them to present an extraordinary argument for why that should be the case.
Yeah, well, and to be honest, that's probably also irrelevant.
Oh, that might have been Zizek. Okay, sorry.
He's a king of irrelevant arguments. That's I would say it's almost like beyond the point because that's just, we can accept that most societies are going to form on the basis of those things being outside of the culture. But like the LGBT issue is a much better, I guess, analog because there's two big issues with it for people who support the prejudice, right? One is that it's hard to establish a victim. It's very easy for us to define prejudices when there's a victim at play, especially when it's a victim of more traditional violence. But we don't have as much for the LGBT discourse. And then the other thing is that...
well, maybe it depends on who you ask, but...
I mean the extreme, because I know you can still argue it's still violence or whatever, but yeah, it's less there, yeah. And then the second thing would be that because it's... very much it's a social phenomena or it's a social question, you end up having the argument that, well, why would it matter? It's a part of my privacy. So you can almost make a traditional argument for it with like an American system. But like, why would you say, for instance, that someone like that guy couldn't just imply that the reason we have that intuition of prejudice against the LGBT doesn't mean it's valid, just culturally?
Why would I argue against him?
Why would you say that's like an invalid or an inappropriate position to have?
Well, I guess first I would have to figure out what is he arguing for insofar as his prejudice manifesting. If he wants to manifest that on a personal level, then I would say he has every right to do that. If he doesn't want to be friends with gay people or trans people, whatever. If he wants to manifest that on a legislative level, then I think we go back to that other argument where I say that different people can have intuitively slightly different feelings about what's ethically right or wrong, and you need to be able to appeal to some rational system that's external your personal religious or personal ethical values in order to argue it with other people. So at that point, you can't just intuitively say, I mean, unless I guess you have the votes for it, you shouldn't be able to just intuitively say, oh, hey, like I have enough people and I'm just going to make this thing illegal, even though it doesn't necessarily affect me personally.
Well, so I think the LGBT issue.
Oh, hello? Sorry, wait. Everything you just said got cut off. You were going to say, I think the LGBT issue, and then I got cut off.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I think with the LGBT issue, you're right that the legislative or the law aspect, it has a more linear, I guess, trajectory, especially in a country like America. So I'm more speaking about socially. For instance, like say someone acknowledges and accepts, hey, the legal movement on this is kind of out of my control because I'm not with where the electorate is. But I think that we should still maintain let's say like a culture of acceptance, but not encouragement.
I guess that kind of feels, I feel like I don't know if I would be able to engage with that argument on its face, because it ends up bleeding into, it's never just like a culture of indifference, or it feels very, very hard for humans to be indifferent towards a thing.
It's not indifference. I don't think it's indifference. It's closer to disgust, I would say, probably, from that perspective.
Yeah, but then disgust oftentimes gives way into other forms of pressure that make it not what the person is saying it would be. Does that make sense? Like, it ends up being a culture of like open discouragement or sometimes impossibility, even if they don't necessarily.
An example of that. So it's like a very, very small anecdote. There was like a very good musician who's trans, but came out as like trans or very openly queer in like the early '80s, and they commented about how they received a lot of discrimination, whatever, in New York, and that it was enough where they felt not comfortable living there. They moved to Japan, and in Japan they found that there was much more of a culture of these people who'd be considered at the time like transvestites, transsexuals, whatever, and that there was no threat of harassment or threat of violence, but they were seen as lesser. They were seen as like kind of disgusting, and it was something that you could feel in the air, even if they would be willing to service you, like provide you with they'd let you shop at their stores. They'd be friendly if you talk to them. But there's I guess you call them microaggressions that are constant. Is that what you're referring to?
Sure, it could be, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'm saying that, for instance, like I would say, like I don't know how someone coming from the perspective of like a country like America, which up until probably the last 30 years has had the acceptance of an open disgust or upset with the LGBT phenomena, why that wouldn't be acceptable on its face.
Well, I think this is, I guess, part of arguing for, what do you think, I think that America is, well, actually, I shouldn't say America. All cultures or countries evolve over time, maybe not religious ones, depending on what you're talking about. But I guess when you're arguing for America changing their stance on this, you would be arguing for what you view as a more perfect version of America, or a better version of America that comports more with its core values, and that the kind of like your abstracted ethics or laws as time progresses will more accurately reflect your core values if they update or change over time. So the obvious example of this for America would be slavery, right? That like we could say, like, well, how could you say slavery isn't a part of America? We were literally founded some part by slavers and with slaves. It's like, that might be true, but in the more perfect, advancement of the country to try to comport with what we feel American values are, and those are changing, and people are fighting over those, right? Because the people that are arguing in favor of one thing are also have a different feeling about the culture. Obviously, that's why they're arguing. So yeah. I guess it's a back and forth, a tension, a tug of war, kind of. Yeah.
I think the problem I would have is have you ever heard the term sublate or sublation?
Like sublimate?
No, it's like I don't think so. It's sort of like an assimilation thing where you take something and you raise it up almost, and you like disperse it into the whole that it's becoming a part of. So for something like slavery, for instance, I would say the reason why that fell out of the culture or seemed to be not reconcilable with the American identity is because it wasn't like, it's not moral even. I think there were moral forces that moved the culture, but it's like incoherent, right? If we think about like the capitalist impulses of America that are innate to its founding, slavery doesn't work with them. It's just true. It was not an economically efficient system, and it created a negative economy. Where
sure, but while that's true, I don't think that was anything. I think that was something that was explored far after the Civil War and far after the disassembly of that system, right? It's not like people were like, the North wasn't like, we need to be economically more prosperous and efficient, let's fight against slavery, right?
Or more cynically, maybe I can try to phrase it more cynically. How would you argue that it wasn't intuitive in the American consciousness that owning someone isn't the best way to leverage debt against them?
How was it not intuitive? Well, I mean, I could just appeal to the version of America that came prior to the Civil War, right? Where people did own people and had the ability to own people, no?
Yes, but the issue is that something existing and then it being like sublated or even just eliminated in the culture. I think it's hard to say that it was just rejected as not being a part of the culture when there's a very intuitive and linear cultural evolution of the concept, which is, again, it's easier to own someone with debt in a lot of ways and more advantageous to do so than it is to own them physically.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Easier, or it's more effective to exert ideas like ownership through debt than it is literal ownership of like humans.
I agree with you there, but I think that's a very contemporary view of debt and ownership, right? I don't know if people at the time were considering these ideas, no?
I mean, wasn't that explored almost immediately in Reconstruction with sharecroppers?
It might have, but I don't know if that was like a way to make it more palatable to the South, or if that was just a way to like figure out.
I'm arguing. I'm saying it's intuitive. That's the
well, but
point.
I think the intuitive there. I think what people were searching for was just a way to kind of like make the country work again and give some people economic opportunities that didn't fit easily into society. I don't think that was like we're trying to make the South accept this more by bringing in sharecropping or something. No.
Well, no, it's because I don't think it's about like I'm not trying to morally load it, but like for instance, I think there's reasons why like there are things like we didn't create a black state, we didn't get rid of all black people and ship them back to Africa, even though the fight against slavery wasn't, as I'm sure, it wasn't about black rights necessarily. It's more that it was an inhumane problem that was causing issues economically and I guess morally. But the concern wasn't for the individual black people. Most people were still extremely racist, right?
I mean, yeah, but probably less racist than before, right?
I mean, yeah, probably. But my point is,
having a person who's like a community of people that are prone to lynching and calling people the N-word and being discriminatory is better, as bad as it sounds, is better than a group of people who are all like owning slaves on plantations, right?
I would. It's probably better. To be honest, I don't know if I can really answer the question, but it's besides the point, at least for me, because the point I was just trying to make with that as an example is that I'm just trying to figure out how would you argue that something that seems to fall so in line with the prejudice, the like base prejudice that's pulling from, isn't connected to that prejudice. It's instead like this sort of like social cultural phenomenon that also just so happens to align with the fundamental principle it seems to be moving with, which I would say is like debt in the American sense.
Fuck, I don't know. This is too much for me. My brain is overloaded. Can you recenter? I guess. Are you saying like what are the are you basically saying that like let me try to rephrase. Yeah. Are you basically saying that like okay, Destiny, you're saying that slavery was abolished on moral grounds. However, isn't it kind of funny that the moral grounds to abolish a particular thing also happened to perfectly align with the economic grounds, and America is kind of founded upon as a almost like laissez-faire, or at least like some kind of like capitalist economy? Like, isn't it strange that morally we found our way to an answer that perfectly aligns with our economic visions as well? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
It goes deeper for me, where I think it's almost cultural, where I think that the economic piece is a part of it, but I think, and again, it's something you can learn not just from our laws and history, but our, the art and whatever we produce, that the American like identity is largely informed around almost like a humorous notion of like total debt, like the ability to do really quite a lot with someone who owes you money, to be able to create immense amounts of leverage when, up until fairly recently, the idea of debt in even a minimal capacity was seen as one of the greatest ills in Western society.
Okay. All right. I'll keep that in mind.
So prejudice, we're not good with them?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I still think that guy was arguing for whack shit, but I understand your perspective.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
I love you. Be careful.
Bye.
Bye. Can you recap this convo? No. It was way more abstract than I thought it'd be. Wait, what is happening here? I have 4 calcite in this thing, and then this grabber is not grabbing here. It says it's waiting for source items. But there are 4 source items on the belt. Why is it not grabbing? And then same thing here. Why is it not grabbing? Is it because it thinks this thing is full? But usually if they're full, usually this will be colored differently. Output full? I don't have this problem on any of my other ships, but maybe it's because I just rebuilt this one. Because all of these work the exact same here. When this is over 2, it grabs. One of the outputs is full. Oh, wait, hold on. No, I don't. I don't understand. Okay, I'm just gonna try to... Oh, no, wait, what? Okay, I'm gonna clear this. And then hopefully it'll work. I guess. It seems cringe. I don't understand it all. And this is working now? I don't understand how that worked at all. Wait, please go park over there for a little bit.